Hey guys, tonight we begin with something deeply unpleasant. You're not a knight. You're not a lord. You're not even a traveling minstrel with questionable rhymes. You're just you. And you've just woken up in a damp, flea-riddled hut in the year 1324. The first thing you notice is the cold, not the brisk kind that wakes you up in winter. This is a damp, seeping chill that settles into your bones. You're wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smells like someone boiled cabbage in it a few days ago. The mattress underneath you is straw, and not the golden fairy tale kind either. It's half rotted, poking you through a thin linen sheet. There's a strong scent of animal. Something. It might be the goat in the corner. Or maybe it's you. The walls are wattle and daub, mud and straw smooshed together into a lumpy surface that offers roughly the same insulation as a wet sponge. No windows, just a wooden shutter you dare not open yet since it's probably still dark. Smoke lingers in the air, though no fire burns. Your eyes itch. There's a hole in the roof to let smoke out, but it seems more efficient at letting rain in. You sit up. A chicken clucks disapprovingly nearby. The hearth, if you can call it that, is a shallow pit of yesterday's ash. Someone's left a bit of gruel in a pot hanging over the embers. But the coals are cold, and so is the gruel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's falling asleep to medieval misery from halfway around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull on a tunic. It's made of scratchy wool and smells faintly of mildew and onion. There's no such thing as underwear, just a long shirt and hose, which are basically thick wool leggings that sag tragically at the knees. You find your shoes by tripping over them. They're little more than leather slippers, damp from yesterday's puddles. You shove your feet in and hope for the best. Right then, there's a bucket in the corner with some water from the well, stale, with a few mysterious floaters. You splash a bit on your face, which is bold, considering the temperature. You decide against brushing your teeth. You don't have a brush, and even if you did, toothpaste hasn't been invented yet. If you're lucky, someone chewed on a twig yesterday. You stumble toward the door and lift the wooden bar holding it shut. Outside it's misty and gray. The mud is ankle deep. You take 2 steps and almost lose a shoe. A pig snorts at you from under the eaves. Someone yells in the distance. Something about bread. A bell tolls from the village chapel. Onyu, onaudi, imo. You try to remember what day it is, but there's no calendar. Just a vague sense of not a feast day and probably time to work. Historians still argue whether peasants in this period had a full 7-day work week. Some believe Sunday was for rest, others say you still had to tend the animals. Today, you're not resting. The morning air smells like wood smoke, manure, and something vaguely fishy. It's a smell you'll come to know very, very well. As you squish across the yard to relieve yourself in the communal trench out back, don't worry, we'll visit that joy in the next section. You pass your neighbor, old Ada, who gives you a suspicious glare and clutches her apron. You may have borrowed her ladle last week and never returned it. Or maybe she thinks you're a witch. Honestly, in this village, both are valid concerns. A few small children run by barefoot, shrieking, covered in grime and joy. They splash in the mud with carefree abandon. You do not have that luxury. Your tunic is already damp at the hem and it's not even sunrise. By the time you make it to the trench and back, again, more on that delightful adventure shortly, you're shivering, hungry, and slightly itchy in places best left unmentioned. And this is just the start of your very bad day. Breakfast. A word that in modern times conjures visions of warm croissants, crispy bacon, golden pancakes, and overpriced coffee in an ethically sourced cup. But here, in your medieval village, breakfast is less of a meal and more of an ongoing disappointment. You return from your frigid stroll to find the rest of your hut's occupants stirring, literally and figuratively. Someone's poking the gruel with a wooden spoon, which doubles as a stirring stick and, on special occasions, a makeshift fly swatter. The fire's been coaxed into reluctant life, offering just enough heat to bring the porridge from cold and congealed to lukewarm and gluey. This is not a feast. It's not even food in the joyful sense of the word. It's a viscous blend of oats, barley, and whatever herbs were still growing in the cracks of the cottage wall. If you're lucky, someone added a pinch of salt. If you're unlucky, it's mouse droppings. You sit on a wobbly stool that has 3 legs and a philosophical belief in balance. The gruel is ladled into a cracked bowl. You eat with a wooden spoon that's been passed down so many generations it might predate spoons. As you choke it down, a small voice in your mind whispers, "This again? Bjat, yes, this again. You had it yesterday. You'll have it tomorrow. In fact, you'll probably be dreaming in oat sludge by the end of the week." Historians still argue whether medieval peasants ate 1 or 2 meals a day. Some sources suggest a small morning bite and a larger midday meal. Others point to the word dinner, originally meaning the first meal after a long fast, often around 10 a.m. Either way, your breakfast here is more of a survival ration than a satisfying ritual. Occasionally, you might get lucky. If you're near a river and someone hasn't fished it empty, there could be a few bits of dried fish tossed into the pot. This morning, there's nothing but grain. Even the chicken seems unimpressed. Your fellow hutmates grunt their way through the meal. Conversation is not exactly sparkling. One of them is clearly battling a head cold, or perhaps it's just the standard medieval respiratory soundtrack. Coughing, throat clearing, and the occasional ominous wheeze. Germ theory hasn't arrived yet, so everyone just assumes you get sick because you've displeased the wind. You step outside again after breakfast. The sun is now visible, peeking through a low mist. It offers no warmth, just light to remind you that the mud has only just begun to form. Across the path, the baker's boy is carrying yesterday's loaves back from storage. They're rock-hard, misshapen, and dusted with flour that may or may not be mostly ground-up insects. Bread is life here, but this is no crusty French baguette. This is survival sponge. In fact, medieval bread was often made with flour so coarse it contained remnants of millstone grit. Historians believe that over time this contributed to the dental downfall of many a peasant. Which means, yes, your teeth are already aching, and it's only breakfast. You manage to barter for a slice of yesterday's bread by trading a favor owed, a muddy cloak mended last week. It's dense, slightly sour, and might actually be easier to eat if you soaked it in the gruel. So you do. And just as you sit back to chew this charming composite of starch and regrets, your neighbor's rooster decides to perch directly in your path, judging you with its beady eyes. Chickens in the medieval village aren't cute, clucking accessories. They're tiny, aggressive dinosaurs with an unholy sense of territorialism. You sigh. There's still the toilet situation to face. And after that, work. Oh yes, it's going to be a long, long day. Let's talk about the toilet. Or more accurately, the complete absence of what you'd recognize as a toilet. There's no porcelain, no flushing mechanism, no private stall with soft lighting and vaguely ocean-scented soap. What you have is a trench. Maybe it's behind a haystack. Maybe it's down near the edge of the field where the pigs also hang out. The details vary, but the experience, universally grim. You trudge back out across the slippery yard, careful not to step in what the goat left behind, which, conveniently, blends seamlessly into the general muck. The latrine is a dugout ditch, reinforced with some rotting planks, and maybe there's a log across it if someone felt particularly generous this week. You balance precariously. You do your business, and you try not to think about the splash, or the smell, or the fact that you'll be back here again later. And if you're wondering about toilet paper, that's adorable. You've got moss, or a handful of hay, or, if you're really desperate, just your left hand and a prayer. Medieval hygiene isn't so much a process as it is a vague hope that nature will rinse you off eventually, maybe during a rainstorm, maybe in the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the average peasant was truly as filthy as pop culture portrays. Some records suggest people did try to stay clean when possible, bathing in rivers, washing their hands before meals, even using rudimentary soaps made from animal fat and ashes. But frequency? Let's just say daily was not the norm. After you've completed your business with as much dignity as possible, which isn't much, you shuffle back toward the hut. The wind picks up, as if to punish you for existing. A dog trots by, carrying something unidentifiable in its mouth. You pretend not to notice. Inside, the fire's going a little stronger now, and someone's boiling what might be laundry or might be soup. It's hard to tell. You hang your cloak on a wooden peg, which promptly falls off the wall. You sigh and pretend it didn't happen. Now it's time to dress properly. Your earlier tunic was just for modesty. The real workday garb involves multiple layers of increasingly scratchy wool, a hood if you're lucky, and shoes that haven't been dry since last spring. You cinch a rope belt around your waist and adjust your hose, which have sagged halfway down your calves already. The effect is not flattering. You glance in a shard of polished metal that passes for a mirror. Your face looks pale, with the kind of hollow-eyed fatigue usually reserved for modern college students during finals week. There's dirt on your cheek that might have been there for 3 days. You decide not to worry about it. Just as you finish adjusting your garb, your youngest sibling bursts in crying, again, because someone took their turnip. Not even a cooked turnip, just a raw one. You consider staging a formal mediation, but instead offer them the heel of your bread. They immediately stop crying, which frankly says more about the general level of expectations than anything else. Before you leave for the fields or the forge or wherever your misfortune has assigned you today, you do what every good medieval soul must do, murmur a short prayer. It's less about piety and more about hoping you don't get trampled by a cart or catch fire. Yes, again. As you step out into the morning drizzle, you're greeted by your friend Tobin, who waves cheerily while sporting a face full of boils. He's either recovering from last week's pox or reacting badly to the homemade ale. Hard to say. You smile weakly, adjust your hood, and begin the long walk toward labor. It's not even 9 a.m. The mud squelches under your feet like a wet sponge soaked in regret. Every step toward your daily job feels like a small betrayal of your soul. And your arches, your shoes, which are essentially 2 slices of damp leather stitched together with hope, do little to protect you from the cold ground. A small rock has lodged itself beneath your heel, and it's not going anywhere. You consider naming it. You've drawn a typical peasant's lot today, manual labor, which in this time period includes pretty much everything except sitting still. You might be sent to the fields to turn soil with a wooden plow, one that's missing a handle and has to be pulled by the village's grumpiest ox. Or maybe you're off to help the blacksmith, which sounds exciting until you realize it mostly involves hauling buckets of coal and receiving mild burns. Today, you're harvesting turnips. Again, you arrive at the edge of the field where the soil is a sticky mess of rain, clay, and fertilizer. The natural kind, generously donated by every animal within a 2-mile radius. You bend, you pull. Turnip. Bend, pull. Slightly smaller turnip. Bend, pull. Oh, look, a rock. You toss it into the growing rock pile, which someone has optimistically dubbed future wall. Your hands are already raw from yesterday. The rough wool of your sleeves scratches your wrists with each movement. There's no such thing as gloves unless you count wrapping old rags around your fingers and pretending they help. A bee buzzes by. You duck instinctively. Last week, someone got stung and swore they saw the devil in the swelling. You work like this for hours, your back slowly forming the perfect question mark. At one point, you pause to scratch the spot behind your knee where the hose has bunched up and pinched your skin. It doesn't help. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants worked more or less than we do today. Some evidence suggests they had more feast days and religious holidays than modern workers get PTO. Others argue those breaks were filled with church obligations, enforced fasting, and yes, more chores. Today, there's no break in sight. Around mid-morning, you hear shouting from across the field. A cart has tipped over. Several people rush to help, but you stay where you are. Not out of laziness, though that's part of it, but because you once tried to lift a barrel and couldn't feel your arms for 2 days. Eventually, the reeve, the local official in charge of making sure peasants don't slack off, comes by. He's perched on a horse too small for his ego and yells vague instructions about yield and duty. You nod obediently while fantasizing about smacking him with a particularly robust turnip. You glance toward the woods. The idea of wandering off into the trees, living off mushrooms and squirrel stew, suddenly holds appeal. But then you remember. Wild animals bandits, and a complete lack of warm socks. You return to your turnips. At one point, you spot a few crows watching from the fence. They seem smarter than most people in the village. One cocks its head at you, and you imagine it whispering, "You chose this life." Actually, no, you didn't. You were born into it, and upward mobility isn't really a thing. If your father pulled turnips, so will you. Unless you die young, in which case someone else gets your patch of land and your crusty shoes. The sun climbs reluctantly overhead, casting weak light on your misery. A breeze kicks up, carrying the scent of manure, sweat, and something that might be dead fish. It's hard to tell. You keep working. Finally, someone rings the chapel bell. It's not noon yet, but it signals a pause. Not rest, just the chance to walk back to your hut, refuel with some bread, and mentally prepare to repeat this exact same dance until the sun goes down. You head back toward the village with a limp you didn't have this morning. Your legs are stiff, your arms ache from hauling root vegetables, and your lower back is composing a strongly worded complaint in Latin, just to be historically accurate. As you trudge through the muck, a familiar figure waves you down. It's Elric, the baker's nephew, and your unofficial walking companion for the lunch break, which is really more of a structured chewing event. He's carrying something wrapped in cloth. You squint. Could it be an actual meat pie? Number. It's yesterday's bread, reheated on a rock, and now twice as hard. Back at the hut, the midday meal awaits, a chunk of rye bread the size and density of a paving stone. It smells slightly sour, which is both normal and slightly alarming. You tear at it with your teeth, an act that requires both courage and jaw strength. You chew more. At some point, you question whether this is food or just nature's edible form of punishment. Someone passes you half an onion. It's pungent, tear-inducing, and strangely the most flavorful thing you've had in days. You savor it like it's a delicacy, which technically it is. Historians still debate what constituted a typical medieval lunch. Some believe peasants might eat pottage, an all-purpose stew of grain, water, vegetables, and occasionally meat, if luck or scavenging allowed. Others argue that bread was so central that entire meals consisted solely of different forms of it, fresh, stale, or dunked in something questionable. Today, there is no pottage, just bread, an onion, and some water that may or may not have shared a bucket with a frog. You sip cautiously. Outside, the village buzzes. Chickens are squawking. Someone's trying to shoe a horse that's clearly not into the idea, and a loud argument breaks out near the well about who stole someone's cabbage. You settle on a log with Elric. He shares a fun fact. The local priest believes that boiling onions in vinegar cures melancholy. You nod politely and wonder whether the vinegar or the priest is more unwell. Your lunch is nearly interrupted by an unexpected event. A procession of rats scurrying across the path. It's unclear what they're running from. Possibly nothing. Possibly everything. You eye them suspiciously. In a few centuries, their descendants will get blamed for one of history's deadliest pandemics. But for now, they're just unpleasant roommates. As you eat, a small group gathers to exchange gossip. Today's topics include whether old Margaret has a pact with forest spirits, probably not. If the miller is shorting flour again, definitely yes. And rumors of a traveler who claims to have seen the sea, dubious but thrilling. Your cousin Willa, who knows everything about everyone, swears she heard that Lord Everley might raise the grain tax again. You suppress a groan. Taxes, after all, are eternal. You clean your teeth with a twig, scraping gently along the gum line and trying not to bleed. Oral hygiene is primitive, but oddly present. Some even chew fresh mint or ash to combat bad breath. You, however, have an old pine needle. It's not minty. It's just piney. As your break winds down, a group of small children barrels past, laughing and carrying what might be a pig's bladder inflated like a balloon. It bounces along the path with a series of wet slaps. You pretend not to mind. It's time to return to work. Your stomach is still growling, but your bread brick has done its best. You stand, crack your knees like they're made of kindling, and nod to Elric. Back to the dirt, he mutters. Back to the dirt, you agree, like a tragic medieval mantra. And off you go, down the path, through the mud, toward an afternoon of more turnips, more mud, and perhaps, if fortune smiles on you, only a minor injury. You return to the field with less enthusiasm than a wet sock. The sun, if you can call it that, hangs low in the sky like a moody candle behind a curtain of gray clouds. The ground hasn't dried. In fact, it's wetter. You begin to suspect the field itself is a sentient creature that thrives on your suffering. Work resumes. Bend, pull, wince, repeat. At one point, you try to adjust your hose, which has slithered halfway down your legs again. Medieval fashion is many things: durable, warm, occasionally embroidered, but practical for manual labor. Not so much. You tug the wool back into place with one hand while holding a misshapen turnip in the other. Balance. Not achieved. A bell tolls faintly in the distance. It's not a church bell. It's the iron triangle hung outside the Reeves' shed. It usually means, come listen to something you'll hate. You trudge toward the sound with the rest of the field workers. The Reeve is waiting, perched on a barrel like a crow delivering bad news. Reminder, he says. The tithes due next week. 1/10 of your yield, same as always. He grins as if this is a cheerful announcement. Everyone grumbles. Some nod. One man spits into the mud, which is both a protest and just what people do here. You walk back to your patch and notice something odd. The ground has been disturbed. A shallow trench, recent, narrow, and clearly not your doing. You kneel to inspect it. Possibly a burrowing animal. Possibly the neighbor trying to expand his row without asking. You sigh. Another problem for another hour. A cart rolls by, pulled by a pair of oxen who look like they've read the script and are just waiting for the ending. The driver is a boy not older than 12. He's yelling at the animals with a voice that hasn't quite decided whether it's deep or squeaky. The oxen ignore him, as do you. Around this time, a woman from the next field over walks by holding a dead chicken. It's unclear if this is dinner or a pet she's mourning. Honestly, both seem plausible. You overhear someone discussing the latest village scandal. The cooper's wife was seen speaking to a traveling monk. Alone, scandalous, unholy, possibly punishable by being glared at aggressively during Mass. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly lived in such tightly wound, rumor-fueled communities, or whether that's more romanticized modern imagining. Evidence suggests a bit of both. With no newspapers, no phones, and no privacy, gossip was both entertainment and power. As you work, your thoughts drift. You think about the warm corner by the hearth, about whether tonight's meal might include more than just turnips, about your toes, which have gone numb but might be staging a mutiny. Then, a distraction. Someone yells, panic in their voice. You whip around, half expecting fire or wolves, but it's just poor Ada tripping into the rut you were examining earlier. She's sprawled in the mud now, flailing like a flipped tortoise. Several people rush over to help. One person laughs. You pretend to be concerned, but mostly you're grateful for the break. A few of the workers drift together after the commotion. Someone pulls out a tiny flask and offers a sip around. It's mead, or something vaguely mead adjacent, brewed in secret with whatever berries and sugars someone could scrounge. You take a sip. It burns your throat and clears your sinuses. For a brief moment, you feel like royalty. Then your stomach growls ominously. A wind kicks up. The field whistles with it. You pull your hood tighter and resume work, though your fingers are stiff and your shoulders ache in a way that suggests tomorrow will be deeply unpleasant. Still, somehow you keep going. Because what choice do you have? As the afternoon wears on, the clouds darken into something more ominous than merely gray. A drizzle starts, not heavy but persistent, like the sky is just mildly disappointed in you. You accept it. At this point, the rain is practically a co-worker. You glance toward the village and spot a few of the elders gathering near the chapel. This can only mean one thing: gossip. You discreetly ditch your turnip post and shuffle toward the group, blending into the perimeter. You recognize the usual suspects: Willa, of course, and old Thomas, who once claimed he met a talking fox in the forest, and you sort of believe him. They're murmuring about a case of the sweating sickness 2 towns over. Or was it a witch's curse? Or maybe both. Someone's cousin supposedly grew horns. Someone else swears they saw a glowing pig. The truth matters less than the delivery. You learn that someone sneezed 3 times in a row last night. Definitely a bad omen. One of the widows insists the wind has changed direction, which clearly means a storm, spiritual or otherwise, is coming. A chicken laid a speckled egg. A goat gave birth to twins. Everything is a sign if you squint hard enough. You'd laugh, but deep down you know how fragile life is here. A stomachache can become a fever can become death. And without microscopes or antibiotics, people reach for the tools they have: ritual, rumor, and superstition. Historians still argue whether the Middle Ages were truly a time of widespread irrational fear, or whether that's an exaggeration from post-Enlightenment snobs. But one thing's clear: if you lived it, you'd be just as wary of hexes, fairies, and ominous breezes. You remember last year when a neighbor's child fell ill. They buried a bundle of herbs beneath the doorstep to ward off spirits. When that didn't work, they shaved a cat and hung it over the fireplace. The child recovered eventually. Everyone said the bald cat did it. As the group disperses, a boy runs by yelling that someone saw a raven circling the granary. The news spreads like wildfire. Ravens are bad luck. Someone's harvest might fail, or their cow might dry up. Or maybe the reeve will finally trip on that stump you've been glaring at for months. You return to work, but the mood has shifted. People are quieter. Even the animals seem edgy. Your friend Elric appears beside you and whispers, "Think it's true about the raven?" You shrug. "Maybe it's just hungry." He nods, but you both keep glancing up. By the time the sun starts setting behind the misty tree line, the air feels heavier. Not just from the damp, but from the creeping sense that something isn't quite right. The village has fallen into that hush where everyone's pretending not to worry while absolutely worrying. Your final task before the end of the day is to help gather firewood. The forest nearby is darkening fast, and no one wants to go too deep. You snap off a few branches, ignore the eerie rustles in the underbrush, and try not to think about spirits. At least one villager swears the woods are home to a woman with backward feet who steals the voices of children. You try not to recall that story now, but your imagination is a traitor. You return with your armload of soggy kindling, soaked and chilled and moderately terrified. And that's when you see him. Amran, your feudal lord, astride a horse the size of a cow, flanked by a few guards. He doesn't speak to you, of course, just rides by slowly, inspecting the villagers as if you're poultry he's considering for purchase. You bow, because not bowing is an option only if you also enjoy dungeons. He doesn't stop, doesn't even glance your way, but his presence sets everyone on edge. Lords don't usually appear without reason. Taxes, decrees, punishments. It's always something unpleasant. The moment passes. The horse's hooves fade into the distance. You exhale and head home. The feudal lord's brief, unsettling appearance has the village buzzing. You overhear whispers as you slosh your way back home, boots squelching in sync with your mounting dread. Nobody knows why he came, which in medieval terms is usually worse than knowing. You arrive at your hut just in time to hear a domestic scuffle next door. Someone forgot to feed the goat again, and the goat has taken matters into its own hooves, namely by knocking over a sack of barley. There's yelling, a loud crash, and an extremely human-sounding "Ma!" You silently thank the universe it wasn't your goat this time. Inside, the hearth has been relit. A small, merciful fire dances beneath a new pot of something. You approach, sniff, and identify it as a sort of pottage, your evening meal. The ingredients vary wildly depending on what's been foraged, grown, or not already eaten by rats. Tonight's version appears to contain barley, cabbage, maybe a few leeks, and a suspiciously chewy bit of something. You decide not to ask. You eat slowly, grateful for the heat and texture, if not the flavor. The entire meal is seasoned with one tiny pinch of salt and 1,000 sighs. The rain has picked up outside, pattering on the roof like a rhythmic complaint. You pull your cloak tighter and settle near the fire to warm your hands. They're cracked and sore, dirt etched so deeply into the creases it might be permanent now. Someone enters the hut with news. There's to be a collection tomorrow. Grain, labor, or both. The Lord apparently needs to repair the manor's stables. Again? Someone mutters. What happened to the last repair? The answer, as always, is, you're not important enough to ask. Historians still argue whether feudal lords offered true protection in exchange for their taxes, or if the mutual obligation was largely skewed in favor of the elite. Most agree. If you were a peasant, the arrangement rarely felt mutual. You step back outside after eating, cloaked against the drizzle. A few villagers are gathered near the center of town where a fiddler is trying to coax a tune out of an old, damp instrument. The melody is slow, uneven, like it's trying to remember how joy works. This, somehow, is the best part of the day. Children dance barefoot in the puddles, giggling and shrieking. A dog joins in, tail wagging. You catch yourself smiling. Not because anything has changed, but because small, ridiculous moments like this are rare and precious. Then someone mentions the Reeve is compiling a list of names. For what? A work party? A tax audit? A witch trial? The ambiguity is unsettling. You shuffle away as unobtrusively as possible. As night inches in, you perform your standard evening hygiene routine. You splash some of the cleaner rainwater from a barrel onto your face. Rub your hands with ash soap that leaves them both drier and somehow stickier, and pick a few wood splinters from your shirt. You even attempt to scrape the worst of the day's grime from your ankles with a rough cloth. The results are modest. At best. Bathing, if you're curious, is an occasional affair. Maybe once a season if you're lucky and not prone to fainting in cold water. There are public bathhouses in cities, yes, but in villages like yours, it's just you, a wooden tub, and the stubborn hope that no one walks in while you're mid-scrub. Tonight there's no tub, just damp fabric, flickering firelight, and a nagging itch behind your left knee that might be a flea, or possibly the ghost of cleanliness past. You sigh. The day isn't over, but you're starting to wish it was. The air inside the hut is thick with damp wool, smoke, and something that might be fermented turnip. You've tried washing your hands, but the grime is resilient, embedded like a medieval tattoo honoring your trade. You settle onto a stool, trying not to collapse completely, as your knees make a noise like old rope being twisted. A loud knock startles you. It's not a visitor. It's just the wind slamming the shutter. But your heart skips anyway, because in this era, unexpected knocks often bring chores, punishment, or news no one wants to hear. Your sibling lights a tallow candle, and the room immediately smells like someone deep-fried regret. The flame flickers in the gloom, casting long shadows across the cracked daub walls. You exhale through your nose and try to relax, which is when someone remembers, it's cleaning night. You groan. Cleaning, of course, is a generous term. Tonight's goal is to beat the straw bedding with sticks to dislodge whatever has moved in since the last attempt. You lift your bedding and immediately spot 2 beetles, a small patch of mold, and something that might be a toe bone from an unidentified rodent. You smack the straw, sneeze from the resulting dust cloud, and cough so loudly you wake the chicken. With the cleaning done, someone decides it's a good time for minor grooming. A nearby comb, carved from bone, is passed around. It has maybe 4 functional teeth left. You run it through your tangled hair with the enthusiasm of a damp towel. There's pulling, wincing, and a small shriek when something wriggly drops to the floor. You try not to look. One of the elders mumbles that people used to wear perfume in ancient Rome. Lavender, he says wistfully. You nod like you've experienced it too. Truthfully, the closest you've gotten to floral fragrance is when you stood too close to the herb drying rack and sneezed yourself into a wall. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly indifferent to cleanliness, or whether they were just limited by access to clean water, soap, and the time not spent simply surviving. Evidence suggests many peasants wanted to be clean. They just didn't have the means to make it happen more than once a month. After the Great Combing, it's time for wound checking. You peel off your hose and examine your legs by firelight. Blisters, scratches, and the occasional mystery bruise are standard. You dab a bit of salve, made from lard, ashes, and a pinch of blessed thistle, on the worst bits. It stings. Or maybe it just smells bad enough to distract you. Someone suggests a poultice for your sore shoulder. It's made of boiled nettles and chewed bread. You decline politely and pretend to fall asleep sitting up. Eventually, someone starts talking about medical advice they heard from the priest. Something about placing leeches behind your ears to balance the humors. Another neighbor swears by sleeping with garlic in your socks. You don't have socks, or enough garlic. You just nod wisely. You're reminded of the time the blacksmith's wife had a persistent cough, and the healer prescribed roasted frog. No one remembers if it worked. Everyone remembers the smell. Outside, the wind howls again. One of the children gasps, "A spirit!" More likely a barn owl. But you agree gravely and add, "It's the White Lady. She visits before a heavy snow." A total fabrication, but the drama helps break the monotony. You offer up a quick prayer before bed. Not because you're deeply religious, but because the thought of dying in your sleep with unresolved turnip theft on your conscience is vaguely unsettling. You stretch out on your straw bedding, wrap your cloak around you, and close your eyes. Then reopen them as the fire pops loudly. Every sound feels louder at night. The wind, the creaking roof beams, the goat chewing contemplatively in the corner. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. Once, then silence. You exhale slowly. One more day survived. Just 6 or 7 more decades to go. You awake in the middle of the night, not because you're well rested, but because something cold and wet has dripped directly onto your forehead. The roof is leaking again. You shift under your scratchy blanket and glance upward. A droplet of water trembles at the tip of a thatch reed, like it's deciding whether you deserve a second drop. You slide to the side, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, and groan softly. Your fellow hutmates stir around you like a den of mildly disgruntled badgers. Someone snores. Someone else mumbles what sounds like an apology to St. Cuthbert. You pretend you didn't hear. You consider going back to sleep, but your head is now too full of itchiness, of discomfort, and of questions like, is it safe to fall asleep while sharing space with a goat? And why do I taste ash, even though I didn't eat any? You sit up and poke the fire back to life. It responds with a sulky hiss and a few sparks that nearly take out your eyebrow. You add a log, which smolders resentfully. From a small shelf nearby, someone offers you an herbal tisane made of boiled nettles and dried rose hips. It's more bitter than comforting, but warm enough to trick your stomach into thinking you've had dinner twice. As you sip, someone across the room clears their throat, too loudly. They lean forward and ask if you've heard about Thomas, the cooper's apprentice. Apparently, he has a swelling behind his ear, and the healer says it might be earworms. You nod solemnly, not sure whether that's literal or just a metaphor for guilt. And just like that, you're deep into the strange and squishy world of medieval medicine. Let's be clear, if you're sick in this era, your options are few, your odds are worse, and your best hope is often divine intervention, or falling asleep and forgetting you're unwell. Most treatments involve a combination of herbs, heated stones, bleeding, or, for the more adventurous, trepanation. Yes, the drilling of holes in the skull to release bad air. Historians still argue whether trepanation had therapeutic value or was just a medieval version of, well, it couldn't make things worse. You personally avoid all doctors unless absolutely necessary. Last time you had a fever, someone suggested wrapping you in a sheep's stomach and reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. You chose to sweat it out instead. The healer in your village, Mother Avis, is a wiry woman with more teeth than expected, and a deep affection for mustard. She carries a pouch full of dried roots, plasters, and at least one desiccated frog. She believes wholeheartedly in the power of goose grease and moonlight. Frankly, she's one of the more trustworthy options. Tonight, though, she's nowhere to be seen, probably treating Thomas and his possibly metaphorical worms. You shift on your mat and sigh. Your legs ache. Your back feels like it's been beaten with a shovel, which, technically, it was. And your lips are chapped to the point of sounding like parchment when you yawn. You think about what might help. A hot bath, a soft mattress, a peppermint tea. You think about the fact that none of those things exist here. You lie back down and tuck your arms into your tunic to conserve warmth. Someone's breathing rhythmically nearby. The goat farts audibly. The fire crackles, and somehow you begin to drift again. Then, soar, a shout. From outside, everyone stiffens. You sit upright, heart pounding, as another voice joins in. 2 people, maybe 3. Men. And they're yelling something urgent. The door bangs open and a neighbor stumbles in. "They've caught a thief," he gasps. You blink. Of course. It's not midnight in the Middle Ages, unless someone's being accused of something. You grab your cloak and rise, because while the justice system here is wildly flawed, it's also the closest thing the village has to entertainment. You step outside into the chill, damp air. The moon is veiled behind thick clouds, casting just enough light to make out shadowy figures clustered near the village green. Lanterns flicker like anxious fireflies, swinging from hands too eager for justice or spectacle, or both. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the murmurs. The crowd thickens near the stocks, a crude wooden frame set up for public punishments. At the center of it all is a boy, maybe 15, with mud-streaked cheeks and a look of utter despair. His tunic is torn, and one of his shoes is missing. The reeve stands beside him, arms crossed, his self-importance radiating like steam off a dung heap. "He was caught near the grain store," someone whispers. "Tried to steal a sack." Another voice mutters, "Just a handful of barley, more like." Details don't matter. In this place and time, accusation is as good as evidence, and punishment is as good as law. The reeve clears his throat. "This village does not tolerate thievery," he declares. "Not from strangers. Not from our own." There's a smattering of agreement. Quiet, uneasy, you shift on your feet. Everyone knows the boy's family lost their pig last week, and their grain store is nearly empty. But sympathy is a dangerous thing to show too loudly. The stocks creak as the boy is shoved into place. His hands and head are locked in the wooden frame. Someone throws a clump of wet straw at him. Someone else laughs nervously. You stand still, heart tight in your chest. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was more performative than punitive. Punishments varied wildly. A thief might lose a hand, or simply be fined, shamed, or exiled. Often decisions were based less on precedent and more on who you knew, how loudly you protested, and whether a priest liked your family. Tonight, it's the stocks. Gang, public humiliation, cold, stiff joints, and a long night of wet feet and jeering passers-by. A woman nearby crosses herself and mutters something about ghosts gathering near the punished. "They come to sniff the shame," she says. You edge away slightly. As the crowd begins to thin, you remain for a while, staring at the boy in the stocks. He says nothing, just shivers. You recognize the look in his eyes. It's not guilt. It's exhaustion. You feel it too. Eventually, you turn away. You're not proud of it. You walk back toward your hut with heavy steps, every creak in the night now sounding more ominous than before. The path is slick with rain and trampled straw. Somewhere in the dark, a dog howls. At the edge of the green, an old man stands alone, muttering a prayer. "Keep the spirits at bay," he says, half to you, half to the night. You nod. You don't believe in ghosts, but you don't not believe in them either. Not after the stories you've heard. Not after what happened to the miller's apprentice last spring. You reach the hut and quietly step back inside. Most of your family is asleep again, bundled under layers of damp cloth and vague hope. You settle near the fire and stare into its embers. You imagine the stalks again, the boy's face, the cold wood, the drip of rain, and you wonder, what if that's you next time? It wouldn't take much. A bad harvest, a missed tax, an unlucky rumor. There's no safety net here, just mud, casinor, straw, and silence. Morning comes slowly in the medieval world, but the village alehouse never truly sleeps. As the first hints of dawn tint the sky in dull pewter, you rouse yourself and trudge down the lane toward the thatched-roof tavern at the edge of the green. It's not exactly open. Nothing is ever formally open. But the door is unlatched, and the faint sound of snoring suggests there are still patrons sleeping it off under the benches. Inside, the scent hits you first. Damp earth, sour ale, feet, and the lingering tang of smoke. The floor is a sticky patchwork of rushes, straw, spilled mead, and something unidentifiable that might once have been cheese. You don't ask questions here. You just step carefully. A crooked table near the hearth holds a jug of watered-down ale and a few wooden mugs. You nod to the innkeeper's wife, who's wiping something from the bar with a cloth that is, arguably, making things worse. She grunts a greeting and shoves a chunk of dark bread toward you. Your cover charge, more or less. You find a seat on a bench that wobbles like it's trying to escape and sip from your mug. The ale is sour, flat, and slightly chewy, but it's warmer than water and doesn't require boiling. Plus, it takes the edge off your aching knees. Slightly. The alehouse is where news travels, and gossip, and questionable songs. You catch the tail end of a story about a man who claims to have ridden a cart all the way to the coast without once getting robbed. Everyone laughs like it's a fairy tale. Someone responds with a joke about a monk, a pig, and a bucket, but it makes no sense and ends in a burp. A trio of older men are debating theology in the corner, loudly. One insists purgatory is just bad weather and taxes. Another counters that he once saw the devil in a puddle. They toast to both theories. The third is asleep. Historians still debate the role of alehouses in medieval society. Some argue they were centers of community life. Others see them as breeding grounds for dissent and disease. But tonight, for you, it's a place to sit without being expected to dig something. The fire crackles in the hearth. Someone begins plucking a lute that's missing 2 strings. The tune is slow and melancholy, but oddly soothing. You lean back, letting the warmth of the room soften your posture for the first time all day. A woman approaches your table and sits down uninvited. She smells of herbs and candle wax. "You hear about the miller's wife?" she whispers. "Says she saw a man walking through the fields last night. No shadow. Left no footprints." You raise an eyebrow. "Maybe he was just light-footed," you say. She nods seriously. "Or a ghost. There are so many ghost stories in this village, it's hard to keep them straight. Some float down from the highlands, others bubble up from local wells. There's one about a boy who disappeared into a tree and reemerged as a bird. Another about a cat who knows your sins. You don't believe all of them. But you don't not believe either. After all, belief is one of the few luxuries you can afford. You finish your ale and stretch. Your limbs creak. The bench groans. The innkeeper gives you a look that suggests it's time to go, so you do. Outside, the mist is lifting, and the first faint light of day draws long shadows from the crooked chimneys. The village is quiet, wrapped in the brief hush between night's chaos and morning's duties. You take a breath. The air smells of smoke, dung, and damp moss. You return to your hut, not to sleep. There's no time for that, but to warm your hands once more before heading to the next task. The next burden, the next stone to roll uphill, because that's life here. You don't make it 3 steps toward your next chore before a crier's voice rings out from the chapel steps. "Gather at the square. A sentence has been passed." You groan quietly. So much for slipping into a nap beside the hearth. In this village, justice is public theater, and attendance, while not mandatory, is strongly expected. And besides, if you don't show up, someone might assume you're hiding something. That's how rumors start, Or worse, accusations. You join the slow trickle of villagers making their way toward the stocks again, but this time the stage is different. A wooden platform has been hastily set up. There's a rope. You know what's coming. No, not that kind of rope. This is medieval justice, but it's still a weekday. Today's punishment is a shaming, not fatal, but definitely memorable. At the center of the crowd, a woman stands tied to a post with her hands behind her back. She's accused of stealing a neighbor's eggs. Not a chicken, just eggs. 2 of them, possibly 3. Maybe they rolled onto her side of the fence. Maybe they didn't. It doesn't matter. The reeve, resplendent in a fur-lined vest that's seen better decades, reads the accusation with theatrical flair. He announces that, in the interest of justice, the accused shall stand for public humiliation and receive 5 lashes with the rod of discipline, which is, if we're being honest, a stick. Someone produces a stick. The woman flinches as the first blow lands. Not hard enough to break skin, but enough to sting. The crowd watches silently. A few children look confused. One man crosses his arms and nods, like this somehow fixes anything. You shift uncomfortably, not sure whether to feel more ashamed of the punishment or of your own numbness to it. Historians still argue whether such public spectacles were more about deterrence or social control. Certainly the goal was not just punishment, but the performance of order. When a community sees the law in action, however crude, it reinforces who holds power and who doesn't. After the lashes, the woman is untied and sent home. No one claps. No one says anything. The crier announces the next meeting will concern sheep pen boundaries. You marvel at the emotional whiplash of this place. The crowd begins to break apart, but before you can leave, a man approaches. He wears a thick belt and an expression that suggests he enjoys rules a little too much. He hands you a summons for ditch duty. Apparently, a section of the drainage trench near the north field has collapsed. And guess who's been selected to help clear it? You. Of course. You make your way to the field, passing the village's single well on the way. There's a short line, as usual, and a spirited discussion about whether the water tastes different this week. One man insists it tastes more frog than usual. A woman suggests blessing the well. Someone else jokes that the frogs have finally won. At the trench, you find a group already working. They're muddy, cranky, and armed with a variety of shovels that look more like weapons. You grab one and begin digging. The earth is sticky, thick, and resists every movement with spiteful consistency. The work is slow. Your back complains. Your arms ache. You forget what dry feels like. At one point, someone finds a smooth rock that looks vaguely like a face. It gets passed around like a relic. You name it Sir Ditch-a-lot. Everyone laughs, briefly. Then returns to digging. A drizzle begins, as it always seems to when your socks have just barely started to dry. Eventually, the trench is mostly clear. You've gained little more than blisters and a vague awareness of how many muscles it takes to scoop mud. You trudge home as the sun begins to set again. Another cycle complete. Another task ticked off. You have no reward, no coin, no thanks. But you do have one thing: tomorrow. You return to your hut, soaked through and caked in a kind of mud that feels both geological and deeply personal. Your shoulders sag. Your knees click like ancient hinges. Even your thoughts feel damp. Inside, someone has managed to coax the fire into a proper blaze. Its warmth kisses your chilled hands as you hover near it, steam rising faintly from your clothes. You peel off your hose, slowly, carefully, as if removing your own skin, and hang them over a chair to dry. They'll be only slightly less horrible in the morning. Someone offers you a cup of warm broth. It's thin, made from boiled bones and leeks, but it tastes like mercy. You hold it close, sip slowly, and close your eyes for a moment too long. Your peace is interrupted by an urgent question from your younger sibling. Do you think ghosts can read dreams? You stare at them. They explain, at great length, that old Gervais told them about a monk who dreamed of bread, only to wake up with a loaf-shaped bruise on his chest. Coincidence? They ask, wide-eyed. Definitely, you mutter, though you suddenly remember your own strange dreams last week, running endlessly down a corridor of cabbage. You decide not to share that. Ghosts are always just around the corner here. If not ghosts, then saints, or devils, or the mysterious creatures said to live in the marsh. Will-o'-the-wisps that lure travelers off safe paths and into soggy oblivion. Historians still argue whether medieval belief systems were rooted in fear, faith, or a practical need to explain the thousand daily uncertainties of peasant life. In practice, it's all three. When crops fail, cows fall ill, or roofs collapse, something must be blamed, and if you can't find the culprit, you invent one. After the ghost talk dies down, the room grows quieter. The fire crackles. Outside, the village is still. The only sounds are the occasional creak of timber, the sleepy cluck of a hen, and the long, slow exhale of the wind through the thatch. You lie back down on your straw pallet, wrapping yourself in your cloak again. Your tunic is still damp, but you're too tired to care. You shift to avoid the lumpy spot where the stuffing's been poking through since last spring. As your eyes drift shut, you reflect on the day. You were rained on. You were accused of nothing, which is a win. You saw someone mildly punished for minor theft and weren't asked to participate. You only stepped in one truly offensive puddle. You did not, against all odds, die. You smile. Barely. The hut dims as someone blows out the candle. The scent of tallow and wood smoke lingers in the air like a blanket. You're vaguely aware of someone snoring, a distant owl hooting, and a few drops of rain tapping at the roof. Sleep begins to tug at you. But not before one last thought floats up, unbidden and half-formed. There has to be a better century than this one. Your dreams are strange. You're walking barefoot across a field of bread loaves, some fresh, some hard as stones. A goose in a bishop's hat is lecturing you on crop rotation. The moon has a face, and it's scowling. A man made entirely of onions hands you a spoon and says, "Time to go." You wake up. The fire's gone cold. The hut is quiet except for the rhythmic snore of the family pig. Dawn is just brushing the horizon, painting the damp walls a pale blue-gray. You lie there, staring upward at the patchy ceiling, where spiderwebs sway gently in the draft. Your body aches naturally. There's a fresh crick in your neck. Your feet feel like sacks of stones. But compared to yesterday, you don't feel worse. That's the closest thing to hope you're going to get. Someone coughs. Another stirs, wraps a shawl tighter, and mutters something about the bread needing to be turned before the rats get ideas. You rise slowly, bones cracking like twigs. The air bites at your skin the moment you step away from the bedding. There's still no true insulation, just a few damp pelts and the vague promise of another fire once someone braves the cold to light it. The bucket of water in the corner has a thin skin of ice. You chip it with your fingers and splash some on your face. It helps. Sort of. You pull on yesterday's tunic, it's still damp. You sniff your cloak and make the executive decision that, yes, this is the best it's going to get. You lace up your worn leather shoes and feel that familiar rock still lodged in the left one. At this point, it's basically family. Outside, the village is slowly coming to life. Smoke begins to rise from chimneys. A child runs past barefoot, carrying an egg and a handful of straw. The Reeves rooster crows once and then stops, as if even it can't be bothered to put in full effort. You head toward the field again. Because of course you do. As you pass the green, you see yesterday's boy still in the stalks. Someone's brought him a crust of bread. He doesn't look up. You keep walking. On the path, you pass Elric, who nods. "Still breathing?" he asks. "Barely," you reply. He grins. Luxury. Together you trudge toward your next shift. More digging, more hauling, more praying the rain doesn't turn to sleet. Elric mentions he heard someone in the next village manage to brew beer that doesn't cause blindness. You both agree that's a miracle worth investigating someday. The rest of the day unfolds as expected. You plant, you pull, you ache. You witness an argument over a sheep that looks suspiciously like someone else's. You hear someone claim their daughter saw a fox dance on its hind legs. You do not question this. You eat another slab of bread. You drink water that smells faintly of moss. You chase a chicken out of your shoe. You live, and that, in the Middle Ages, is enough. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the fields, you return to your hut. You sit by the fire again, watching the flickers play across your fingertips. The wind moans through the gaps in the wall like a tired ghost. Someone begins to hum a lullaby that has no beginning and no end, and you lie back down. You think of nothing in particular, just warmth, straw, maybe a better dream this time. And now, as the fire fades and the embers dim, let yourself drift. The village is quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a day so long and full, you've forgotten how it began. The goats are settled. The wind has softened. Even the chickens are finally still. Outside, the stars are beginning to blink awake, one by one, behind a veil of mist. The moon watches silently, gentle and pale, casting faint silver light on thatched roofs and muddy paths. Everything is at rest. Breathe in slowly, the scent of ash and earth, of old wool and damp wood. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. It's safe, in its own stubborn way. You've done your part today. You've hauled and hobbled and laughed when it hurt. You've shared your bread, your silence, your stories. You've survived, without fanfare, without glory, but with the quiet strength that holds the world together. Let your muscles soften now. Let your thoughts float. There are no tasks left, no turnips to pull, no fires to tend. Just this, stillness, warmth, the hush of a world before machines, before noise, before time moved so fast. Sleep comes like a woolen cloak draped across your shoulders. Let it cover you, let it keep you, and when you dream, may it be of dry socks, warm porridge, and a bed without beetles. Sweet dreams.